Sign it or leave, my son said, pushing the papers across the dining table toward me. I noticed the way the folder stopped just inches from my plate. Cream-colored cardstock. My name already printed neatly above a thin black line waiting for my signature. I just looked at it. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me the city you're watching from. I've learned that stories like mine travel farther than we ever expect. It had been exactly 22 days since we buried my husband. 22 days since I stood beside a polished oak casket under a gray October sky in Ohio, my black heels sinking slightly into damp cemetery grass. 51 years of marriage lowered into the ground in less than 10 minutes. And now, I was being asked to sign something. The dining room still smelled faintly of the lilies people had sent after the funeral. I had moved most of them to the kitchen because their sweetness was starting to turn heavy, almost sour. The mahogany table Harold and I bought in 1987 gleamed under the chandelier. I had polished it that morning. Habit. Across from me sat Daniel, my only son, 46 years old. Broad shoulders. Same hazel eyes as his father, but not the same softness. To his right sat Melissa, my daughter-in-law of 12 years. Her posture was perfect. Hands folded. Expression composed. Watching. Mom, Daniel said, tapping the edge of the folder. It's just paperwork. We talked about this. No. He talked. I listened. I didn't realize we were finishing that conversation tonight. I replied. My voice sounded steady. I was almost proud of that. Melissa leaned forward slightly. We're just trying to make things easier for everyone, she said in that gentle tone she uses in front of other people. The one that sounds like concern but feels like calculation. Easier. The word hung in the air like dust in sunlight. I looked down at the first page. Quitclaim deed. My eyes moved slowly across the legal language. Transfer of interest. Property located at 214 Maple Ridge Drive. Full relinquishment of rights. This house. The house Harold and I paid off 5 years early by skipping vacations. The house where Daniel took his first steps in the living room, crashing into the same fireplace he now stood beside. You said the house would stay in the family, Daniel continued. This keeps it clean. Simple. Clean. Simple. I folded my hands in my lap instead of touching the pen. Outside, a truck drove past. The headlights slid briefly across the curtains, illuminating the faint outline where Harold's favorite armchair still sat in the corner. I hadn't moved it. I wasn't ready. It's too much house for you alone, Melissa added. 3,000 square feet. The stairs. The yard. The maintenance. She said it the way someone lists defects in a property they're about to renovate. I've managed it for 38 years, I said quietly. Daniel sighed. That sigh? The one teenagers use when they think their mother just doesn't understand how the world works. It's not about managing, he said. It's about being practical. We can refinance. Pull equity. Fix it up properly. There it was. Equity. I felt something inside me settle. Not break. Settle. So you'd own it, I said. Daniel hesitated half a second too long. It's just temporary. Until things are sorted. Melissa placed her hand gently over his. A small movement. Reassuring. Strategic. We're not trying to take anything from you, she said. But the document said otherwise. The room felt smaller than usual. The chandelier hummed faintly. I noticed everything. The scratch on the table from when Daniel dragged a toy truck across it at age 6. The slight chip in Melissa's pale pink nail polish. The way Daniel avoided my eyes. Grief does something strange. It sharpens you. The first week after Harold died, I moved like I was underwater. I forgot where I left my reading glasses. I poured coffee into a cup without putting grounds in the machine. I slept on his side of the bed just to feel the dip in the mattress. But somewhere around day 15, the fog began to lift, and I started noticing things. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Melissa browsing real estate sites, just out of curiosity. Daniel asking casual questions about insurance policies. Now this. Mom, Daniel said again, a little firmer. Sign it or leave. We can't move forward if you keep stalling. Leave. The word landed harder than the rest. Leave where? This was my address. My mailbox. My kitchen cabinets arranged exactly how I liked them. My rose bushes outside the front window that Harold planted the year he retired. I looked at my son. For a brief second, I saw the boy who used to run into my arms after Little League games, dirt on his knees, asking if we could get ice cream on the way home. That boy would never have said leave. When did you draft this? I asked. Last week, Melissa answered smoothly. Last week, while I was choosing the hymns for Harold's memorial service, while I was writing thank you notes to neighbors, while I was sleeping with a box of tissues on my nightstand. I see, I said. Daniel pushed the pen closer to me. It rolled slightly and stopped against my plate. I picked it up. Melissa straightened almost imperceptibly. Daniel leaned forward. I turned the pen in my fingers, studying the weight of it. Harold always said I had beautiful handwriting. He liked watching me sign Christmas cards. I placed the pen down again. Not on the signature line. On top of the folder. I'm not signing tonight, I said. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, this isn't personal. Everything about it was personal. Melissa's tone shifted just a degree. If you won't cooperate, we'll have to reconsider arrangements. Arrangements? The words sounded rehearsed. What arrangements? I asked. Daniel looked uncomfortable now. We were thinking you might be happier somewhere smaller. A condo. Maybe one of those senior communities with activities. Activities. As if my life had become a schedule to be managed. And if I don't agree? I asked calmly. Silence. Then Daniel said it again, more quietly this time. Sign it or leave. There it was. Clear. Stripped of decoration. I felt a surprising wave of clarity. Not anger. Clarity. I closed the folder carefully. Aligned the edges. Then I stood. The chair legs scraped softly against hardwood floors. Harold refinished himself 20 years ago. I need some air, I said. Daniel began to protest, but Melissa touched his arm again. Let her think, she murmured. I walked toward the hallway. Past the framed photos. Daniel's high school graduation. Our family trip to Yellowstone. Harold holding our newborn grandson on this very couch. In our bedroom, the bed was still neatly made from that morning. Harold's watch lay on the dresser where I had placed it after the hospital handed me his belongings in a small plastic bag. I sat on the edge of the mattress. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself to breathe fully. Sign. It or leave. They thought I was cornered. They thought grief made me weak. But Harold had not been careless. And I had not been foolish. On his last night in the hospital, when machines hummed softly and the nurse dimmed the lights, he squeezed my hand and said, everything's taken care of. At the time, I thought he meant emotionally. Now, sitting in the quiet of our bedroom, I wondered if he meant something else. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. There was one number I hadn't called yet. And tomorrow morning, I intended to use it. The next morning, I didn't mention the papers. I made coffee the way Harold liked it. 2 scoops of grounds. A pinch of cinnamon. Even though he wasn't there to drink it. Daniel and Melissa had stayed the night in the guest room. They said it was to help me adjust. I understood now that they were making sure I didn't make any sudden decisions without them. I moved quietly through the kitchen. The sun came in through the east window, catching dust in the air. For a moment, everything looked peaceful. Ordinary. That's the dangerous thing about betrayal. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it sets the table and waits. Melissa came in first. Yoga pants. Hair pulled back neatly. She smiled. Morning, she said lightly. Did you think about it? She didn't say what it was. I did. I replied, pouring my coffee. And, she pressed. I decided not to rush. Her smile tightened just slightly. We're only trying to protect you. Protect. It's interesting how that word can be used like a blanket. Or like a leash. Daniel walked in a few minutes later. He looked tired. Or maybe frustrated. Mom, he began, skipping any greeting. We need to handle this before the probate stuff gets complicated. Probate. So they had been doing research. I sat down at the kitchen island instead of the dining table this time. Different room. Different energy. Your father and I handled our affairs carefully, I said. There shouldn't be complications. Daniel avoided my eyes again. It's just easier if the house is under my name now. Easier for who? I asked. Silence. Melissa stepped in smoothly. For taxes. For refinancing. For long-term planning. You shouldn't be worrying about property management at your age. At your age? There it was. I am 68 years old. I still drive myself to the grocery store. I still mow my own lawn. I still balance my checkbook without help. Age had suddenly become their strongest argument. I've been paying property taxes on time for 38 years, I said calmly. I think I can manage one more season. Daniel exhaled sharply. You're being stubborn. No, I was being awake. After breakfast, I went upstairs and closed the bedroom door behind me. I opened Harold's old leather portfolio from the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside were copies of insurance policies, the mortgage payoff letter from 5 years ago, and a small envelope labeled in his handwriting. House, trust. My heart slowed. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it carefully. Inside were documents establishing a living trust created 3 years before Harold retired. I remembered the day now. We drove 40 miles to meet an estate attorney in Columbus. Harold insisted we future-proof everything. The trust named us both as co-trustees. Upon his passing, I became sole trustee. Not Daniel. Not anyone else. I kept reading. The property at 214 Maple Ridge Drive had been transferred into the trust. That meant no probate. No automatic claim. No one could simplify it without my consent. I felt something steady settle inside my chest. They hadn't counted on that. There was also a second page I didn't remember discussing in detail. A clause stating that if any beneficiary attempted to coerce or legally pressure the trustee for premature transfer of assets, their share could be reduced or revoked. Harold, even in his absence, he was still protecting me. I closed the folder and rested my hands on it for a long moment. Downstairs, I could hear Daniel's voice. Low, irritated. Melissa's voice followed. Calm, strategic. I stood and walked to the window. From there I could see the front yard. The rose bushes were beginning to fade with the season. Harold used to prune them every September. He always said, "You have to cut back what's overgrown so it doesn't choke the roots." I finally understood what he meant. Later that afternoon, Daniel knocked on the bedroom door. "Can we talk?" he asked. I opened it. He looked conflicted. Not cruel. Not evil. Just influenced. "Melissa found a senior living community about 20 minutes from here," he said carefully. "They have social events. Transportation. It might be better than rattling around in this big house." I studied his face. "When did you decide I was rattling?" I asked. He shifted his weight. "It's not like that. It feels like that." He ran a hand through his hair, just like he used to do before confessing he'd broken a neighbor's window as a teenager. "Mom, we're thinking long-term." "So am I," I said. He looked confused by that answer. "I have an appointment tomorrow morning," I added. "With who?" he asked quickly. "With someone your father trusted." His expression changed. Not fear, but uncertainty. "You're not signing?" he asked quietly. I held his gaze this time. "No," I said. "I'm not." For the first time since the funeral, I saw something flicker across his face. Not anger. Doubt. That night at dinner, no one mentioned the papers again. But the silence had shifted. It wasn't heavy with grief anymore. It was heavy with realization. They were beginning to understand that I was not as fragile as they had assumed. And tomorrow morning, they would understand something else. This house was never just walls and square footage. It was protection, and I was no longer standing alone inside it. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not in black. Not in morning gray. I chose a navy blazer Harold bought me for our 40th anniversary dinner. "You look powerful in blue," he had said. I wanted to remember that. Daniel noticed when I came downstairs. "Where are you going?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I told you," I replied. "An appointment." Melissa was already at the counter scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up, but she was listening. She always listened. "With who?" Daniel pressed again. "With someone your father trusted," I repeated. I picked up my handbag. The leather was worn soft from years of use. Inside, the trust documents rested neatly in a folder. As I reached the door, Daniel spoke again. "Mom, we're not your enemies." I paused. "I never said you were," I answered. But I didn't say they weren't trying to become something close to it. The drive into Columbus took about 45 minutes. I kept the radio off. The silence helped me think. When I walked into the law office, the receptionist greeted me by name. Harold and I had sat in these chairs 3 years ago, planning for a future that felt distant at the time. Now I was living in it. Mr. Whitaker looked older than I remembered. Thinner. But his handshake was firm. "I was sorry to hear about Harold," he said sincerely. "He was a careful man." "Yes," I replied. "He was." I placed the folder on his desk and slid it toward him, the same way my son had slid papers toward me the night before. "They want me to sign over the house," I said calmly. Immediately, he adjusted his glasses and began reading. The room was quiet except for the soft turning of pages. After a few minutes, he looked up. "You are the sole trustee," he said. "No one can force you to transfer the property." I felt my shoulders lower slightly. "There's more," he added, tapping the clause about coercion. "If anyone attempts to pressure you for asset control, it can legally affect their inheritance." Pressure. That word felt precise. Define pressure, I asked. He met my eyes. Ultimatums qualify. I nodded slowly. Sign it or leave. When I walked back to my car, the October air felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel's car was still there. So was Melissa's. They hadn't gone to work. They were waiting. I sat in my car for a full minute before stepping out. The steering wheel felt warm under my hands. I let myself breathe slowly, evenly. This was still my home. My driveway. My front door. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel stood near the living room window. Melissa was seated at the dining table, the same folder from 2 nights ago placed neatly in the center like a centerpiece. You were gone a while, Daniel said. I had business to take care of, I replied, setting my purse on the hallway table. Melissa's eyes flicked briefly to the folder in my hand. She noticed I brought something back. Did you talk to someone? She asked, tone careful. Yes. I walked into the dining room and took my usual seat. Not at the head of the table. Harold's chair was still empty. I wasn't ready for that. Daniel stepped closer. Mom, we're just trying to avoid complications. There won't be complications, I said calmly. Melissa leaned forward. If this is about control, we can put your name on things too. Joint ownership. We're flexible. Flexible. That wasn't the word for what they had done. I opened my folder and removed a single sheet. I placed it on the table, just as Daniel had done to me. No drama. No raised voice. The house is in a living trust, I said. I am the sole trustee. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? It means, I continued evenly. No one can transfer ownership without my consent. Silence filled the room. Melissa's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. And, I added, letting the pause settle. Any attempt to pressure me into transferring assets can legally affect future inheritance. Daniel's face changed first. Confusion. Then calculation. That's not what we're doing, he said quickly. Good, I replied. Because 2 nights ago, it felt exactly like that. The folder between us suddenly looked smaller. So did the ultimatum. I folded my hands in front of me. This house isn't being signed over, I said. Not now? Not under pressure. No anger. No lecture. Just a boundary. And for the first time since Harold passed, I watched my son realize something important. I was not alone. And I was not uninformed. Daniel didn't argue right away. That was what told me he was thinking. Melissa recovered first. Well, she said carefully, smoothing an invisible wrinkle on the tablecloth. We didn't know about the trust. I know, I replied. And that was true. They hadn't known. That was the part that unsettled them. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down slowly, facing me. Not across the table this time. Closer. So what happens now, he asked. The question sounded different from the ultimatum. Now it carried uncertainty. Now, I said, nothing changes. Melissa's lips pressed into a thin line. But long-term planning will be handled, I finished calmly. By me. Silence again. I could almost see them recalculating. This house was no longer an easy asset to leverage. No quick refinance. No clean transfer. No immediate equity. Just me. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We were just trying to build something bigger, he said. Maybe upgrade. Move closer to a better school district for the kids. Oh, there it was. Not just security. Ambition. I understand wanting more, I said gently. Your father and I wanted more once too. We wanted stability. Not shortcuts. Melissa stood up and began gathering the unsigned papers from the table. Her movements were controlled, but not relaxed. We'll revisit this later, she said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a postponement. I watched her slide the documents back into the folder, the same way Daniel had pushed them toward me days earlier. Only now, they felt lighter. That afternoon, I walked through the house slowly. From the living room to the kitchen. Upstairs to the hallway where pencil marks still tracked Daniel's height year after year. 5 years old. 10. 16. Harold had insisted on marking the wall even after Daniel said he was too old for that. You'll want to remember, Harold said. He was right. I paused in front of our bedroom mirror. The same mirror where I had once stood adjusting a navy blazer for an anniversary dinner. I didn't look fragile. I looked steady. Downstairs, I heard Daniel's car engine start. Then Melissa's. The house grew quiet again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clear. They thought the conversation was paused. What they didn't realize was that something else had already begun. I wasn't just protecting the house. I was reconsidering everything connected to it. The next 2 days were quiet. Too quiet. Daniel didn't bring up the house again. Melissa didn't mention refinancing or long-term planning. They moved through the space like careful guests instead of decision-makers. But I noticed small things. Melissa taking photos of the kitchen with her phone. Daniel measuring the living room wall with his eyes. Whispers that stopped when I entered. They weren't done. They were adjusting. On the third evening, Daniel approached me while I was watering the rose bushes outside. "Mom," he said, hands in his pockets, "we've been thinking." I kept the hose steady. The water pressure hummed softly. "That usually means something follows," I replied. He gave a short, humorless smile. "What if we all move forward together?" he said. "You stay here. We invest in renovations. Increase the value. Everyone benefits." "Everyone. Who pays for the renovations?" I asked. "Well, the trust could," he said cautiously. "Or we could structure something." Structure. Another careful word. I turned off the water and faced him. "The trust exists to protect stability," I said, "not to finance upgrades." His jaw tightened again. The same tension I'd seen at the dining table. "It feels like you don't trust us," he said quietly. That one landed differently. "Trust. I trusted you when you said the paperwork was just formality," I answered evenly. "It wasn't." He didn't respond. The evening light cast long shadows across the yard. The roses were fading, but their stems were still strong. "I'm not your obstacle," I continued. "I'm your mother." For a moment, he looked younger, uncertain. Then the expression shifted back into calculation. "We'll figure something out," he said. I nodded. "Yes," I replied softly. "We will." But as he walked back inside, I knew something had changed. They weren't pushing directly anymore. They were looking for another door. And I had already decided something they didn't know yet. Protection isn't only about keeping what you have. Sometimes it's about deciding who no longer gets automatic access to it. That evening, I didn't mention the amendment again. I made dinner as usual. Baked chicken, steamed green beans, mashed potatoes the way Daniel liked when he was a boy, extra butter, a little cream. We sat at the same table where the papers had first been pushed toward me. No one brought them up. But everything had shifted. Melissa scrolled through her phone between bites. Daniel ate quietly, thinking. I could almost see the calculations moving behind his eyes. After dinner, I cleared the plates myself. I didn't ask for help. In the kitchen, I heard their voices, low, controlled. "She changed it," Melissa whispered. "We don't know how much," Daniel replied. "We should have handled this earlier." Handled. I dried my hands slowly on a dish towel. They weren't upset about the house. They were unsettled about timing. Later, Daniel stepped into the kitchen. "Mom," he said carefully, "we didn't mean to make you feel cornered." Cornered. That word was closer to the truth. "I know," I said, "but knowing doesn't erase behavior." He leaned against the counter, the same place he used to sit doing homework while I cooked. "We were just trying to plan ahead," he added. "Planning ahead is wise," I said evenly. "So is patience." He didn't argue. That was new. Upstairs, I could hear Melissa opening drawers in the guest room, closing them again. Restless. They had assumed momentum. Now they were facing structure. Before bed, I walked through the house one more time. The living room. The hallway with the height marks. The staircase Harold refinished by hand. Nothing had changed physically, but the balance had. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like I was defending something. I felt like I was defining it. Protection doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's simply saying no once, and meaning it. And I could tell from the quiet in the house that they understood something now. Access was no longer automatic. It was conditional, and I was the one holding the conditions. The following week, Daniel and Melissa became accommodating. Too accommodating. Daniel started mowing the lawn without being asked. Melissa reorganized the pantry and labeled containers in neat handwriting. They offered to pick up groceries, to handle bills, to lighten my load. I watched quietly. When pressure doesn't work, persuasion often follows. One evening, Melissa brought tea into the living room while I was reviewing bank statements. "I've been thinking," she said gently, handing me the cup. "Maybe we came on too strong." I looked up at her. "That happens sometimes," I replied. She sat across from me, posture relaxed, but eyes attentive. "We really do want what's best for you," she continued. Security. Stability. Interesting choice of words. Security and stability were exactly what the trust had ensured. Without them. "I appreciate concern," I said calmly. I don't respond well to ultimatums. She nodded slowly. Daniel regrets how he phrased things. Phrased. As if tone were the only issue. Later that night, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. I'm sorry for saying leave, he said, standing in the hallway like he used to after breaking curfew. I know, I answered. He waited, perhaps expecting reassurance. Instead, I asked, if I had signed, what would have happened next? He hesitated. We would have refinanced, he admitted. Pulled some equity. Invested it. In whose name? He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me more than words could. I'm not your investment strategy, I said gently. He looked down. I didn't think of it that way. I know. And I believe that part. The next morning, I made another quiet decision. I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor recommended by Mr. Whitaker. Not because I doubted the trust, but because clarity should extend beyond defense. If they were planning, I would plan better. Not to punish. Not to compete. To ensure that whatever happened next in this house happened on steady ground. That afternoon, as I watched Daniel and Melissa discussing something softly near the kitchen island, I realized something simple. They were adjusting their approach again. But this time, they were reacting to structure. And structure has a way of revealing intentions over time. I was in no hurry. Time, after all, was finally on my side. 2 days later, I invited them to sit down with me. Not at night. Not after dinner. Saturday morning. Clear light. No shadows. Daniel looked cautious when I asked. Melissa looked curious. We gathered in the living room this time, not the dining table. I chose Harold's armchair again. They sat on the sofa across from me. I met with a financial advisor, I began. Daniel straightened slightly. Why? Because if we're discussing the future of this house, I said calmly, we should discuss it properly. Melissa crossed her legs neatly. And the trust remains exactly as it is, I continued. However, I've structured my personal accounts to ensure long-term care, property taxes, and maintenance are covered independently. Daniel frowned. Independently from what? From you? I replied gently. The word didn't come out sharp. Just clear. I don't want you feeling responsible for my stability, I added. And I don't want stability used as leverage. Silence. Melissa spoke first. We never saw it as leverage. Perhaps not consciously, I said. Daniel leaned forward. So where does that leave us? That was the right question. It leaves us as family, I answered. Not business partners. He absorbed that. I continued. If you want to invest in your own property, I support that. If you want financial advice, I'll gladly share contacts. But this house is not a stepping stone. Melissa's expression hardened just slightly. You think we were using it? I think, I said carefully. You were counting on it. Daniel didn't deny it. He looked around the room, at the fireplace, the framed photos, the staircase. I just thought it would be ours sooner, he admitted quietly. There it was. Not cruelty. Expectation. Sooner isn't always wiser, I said. No raised voices. No accusations. Just reality placed gently on the table. After a long pause, Daniel nodded once. We'll figure out something else, he said. Melissa didn't speak, but I could see it in her eyes. The strategy had shifted again. Only this time, they understood something important. The house wasn't up for negotiation. And neither was I. The house became quieter after that conversation. Not tense. Measured. Daniel stopped bringing up refinancing. Melissa stopped mentioning renovations. Outwardly, everything looked normal again. But normal had a new boundary around it. One evening, I came downstairs and found Daniel standing in front of the hallway wall, the one with his childhood height marks. He traced one of the pencil lines with his finger. Dad really kept all of these, he said. Yes, I replied from the doorway. He said growth should be documented. Daniel gave a small smile. I used to think this place was small, he admitted. Now it feels different. It hasn't changed, I said. He looked at me. Maybe I have. That was closer to the truth. Melissa joined us a moment later, arms folded loosely. We've been looking at houses, she said. Further out. Smaller lot. New build. I nodded. That sounds wise. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. We may put in an offer next month, he added. There it was. Movement. Not around me. Away from me. I hope it works out, I said. And I meant it. Melissa studied my face, as if searching for something. Hesitation, perhaps. Regret. She didn't find it. That night at dinner, the air felt lighter. Not because everything was resolved, but because the pressure had dissolved. They were building something of their own now. without counting on mine. Later, after they went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room. The lamp beside Harold's chair cast the same warm circle of light as always. I realized something simple. Control doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like quiet redirection. They had tried to accelerate the future. I had slowed it down. And in doing so, I had given them something unexpected. Responsibility. The house remained exactly where it had always been. But the balance inside it had shifted permanently. Not through anger. Through clarity. A few days after they left, Daniel came back alone. No moving truck. No boxes. No Melissa. He stood on the porch holding a small cardboard box. "I found these in the garage," he said when I opened the door. "Dad's old letters." I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where everything had shifted weeks earlier. He placed the box between us and opened it. Carefully. Inside were yellowed envelopes tied with twine. My handwriting on most of them. His father's on a few. "You two wrote a lot," he said quietly. "We didn't always agree," I replied. "Writing slows people down." He nodded. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment. "About what you said. About pressure." I waited. "I didn't see it that way," he admitted. "I saw opportunity. Timing. Efficiency. And now?" I asked. "Now I see that I skipped something." "What?" "Respect." The word sat gently between us. Not dramatic. Not forced. Just honest. I studied my son's face. The ambition was still there. The drive. But something had softened around the edges. "You weren't wrong to plan," I said calmly. "You were wrong to assume." He exhaled slowly, almost relieved. "I guess I thought once Dad was gone, things would just transition." "They do," I replied. "But not by force." Silence followed. Not awkward. Settled. He looked around the kitchen, at the cabinets, the window over the sink, the familiar layout he grew up with. "It feels different here now," he said. "It is," I answered. "How?" "I'm not defending it anymore," I said. "I'm choosing it." He nodded. After a while, he stood up. "I'm glad you didn't sign," he said again. This time, it sounded deeper. "So am I," I replied. When he left, the house didn't feel contested. It felt understood. Not because everything was perfect, but because the line had been drawn and respected. And sometimes, that's enough. A month after the papers were pushed across this table, I sat in the same chair with a different feeling in my chest. Not shock. Not defense. Peace. The house was quiet again. Not the heavy quiet that followed Harold's funeral. Not the tense quiet of whispered calculations. A settled quiet. Daniel and Melissa were in their new home now. 25 minutes west. New walls. New mortgage. Their name on the deed. Built properly. Last Sunday, they invited me over for dinner. Melissa showed me the kitchen proudly. Daniel talked about repainting the living room. They argued lightly over curtain colors. Normal things. At one point, Daniel handed me a glass of iced tea and said, "We did this ourselves." There was pride in his voice. Not dependence. "I know," I said. And that was the difference. When I returned to Maple Ridge Drive that evening, I walked through the front door and didn't feel like I was guarding something. I felt like I was honoring it. Harold's chair still sits in the corner. The height marks are still on the hallway wall. The trust documents are secure in the safe. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting match. No courtroom scene. No family explosion. Just a line drawn quietly. And respected. Sometimes people think strength looks loud. It doesn't. Strength can look like a widow reading every page before signing. It can look like saying no once and meaning it. It can look like allowing your children to build their own future without dismantling yours. That night, I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the yard Harold loved. The roses are trimmed now. I cut them back myself. He used to say, "You prune what's overreaching so the roots stay strong." He was right. I didn't sign. I didn't leave. And the house that was built by two people still stands exactly where it belongs. So do I.